Imagine this. You've worked your entire life to buy something that's truly yours, a private warehouse. It's not just storage, it's your sanctuary. Now, picture waking up one morning to find strangers' cars crammed into your space, like they own the place. And here's the kicker, they think they have permission, because someone else said so. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most infuriating battles anyone can face. Homeowners associations, or as I call them, the Karen Brigade. Spoiler alert. This story ends with me towing every single car off my property. But before we get there, let's talk about how things got so bad that I had no choice. Why do people think rules don't apply to them? Why does common sense seem optional when you live in certain neighborhoods? And why are some people so convinced they're above basic human decency? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did, and maybe you'll even cheer me on. One day, I noticed a random SUV parked inside my warehouse bay. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a neighbor dropping something off and forgetting to move it. No big deal, right? So I left a polite note on the windshield. "Hi, this is private property. Please move your vehicle ASAP." Fast forward 2 days later, same car, different note. Except now, I'm less Mr. Nice Guy and more Clint Eastwood. Last warning, move your car or I will tow it. Still nothing happens. Meanwhile, another car shows up, then another. By week 3, my warehouse looks like a used car lot. And oh, the excuses. Oh, the excuses. When I finally confronted one of these drivers, they actually said, "Well, the HOA said we could park here temporarily." Temporarily? Lady, if temporary means 3 weeks without permission, then yeah, sure, go ahead and call it that. Now, meet Karen number 1. She rolls up while I'm inspecting the damage. Arms flailing, voice louder than necessary, she starts yelling about how I'm being unreasonable. 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 Her exact words were, "You're ruining community spirit." Community spirit? Ma'am, this isn't Woodstock, it's my warehouse. But wait, it gets better. Karen number 1 calls the HOA board, who then sends me a strongly worded email saying, "We need to discuss your lack of cooperation." Cooperation? Cooperation? I wasn't aware letting strangers invade my property counted as teamwork. The final straw came when I found a guy using my warehouse as his personal mechanic shop. Oil stains everywhere, tools scattered across the floor. He literally looked me in the eye and said, "What's the problem? There's plenty of room." Plenty of room? Sir, this is not IKEA parking, we are done. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called a towing company, sent out official notices, and made sure everyone knew exactly what was coming next. Let's take a step back and analyze what's really going on here. Why do people feel entitled to other people's stuff? Is it ignorance, laziness, or just plain old narcissism? Homeowners associations exist to maintain order, but sometimes they become breeding grounds for power struggles. Some members see themselves as mini-dictators, enforcing arbitrary rules while ignoring boundaries themselves. Take Karen number 1, for example. She didn't care about my rights as a property owner, she cared about convenience. To her, my warehouse was just empty space waiting to be exploited. This brings us to the psychology behind entitlement. Studies show that people in positions of perceived authority often overstep ethical lines. Whether it's an HOA president abusing their power or a Karen demanding special treatment, the root cause is the same: a distorted sense of superiority. Sound familiar? These kinds of disputes happen all the time. Remember the viral story of the Florida homeowner who painted his roof orange after the HOA denied his request? Or the California couple fined $5,000 for having a vegetable garden? Absurdity knows no bounds. These incidents highlight a deeper issue: the clash between collective control and personal freedom. Where do we draw the line between community standards and individual autonomy? And whose responsibility is it to enforce those lines fairly? Growing up, my family lived in a neighborhood with strict HOA rules. Back then, I didn't think much of it until my dad got fined for leaving our Christmas lights up past the 15th of January. $15 might not sound like much, but it felt like a slap in the face. Who decides arbitrary deadlines for holiday cheer? That experience shaped how I view property ownership today. Your home, or in my case, your warehouse, is more than bricks and mortar. It's a reflection of who you are. Allowing others to disrespect that feels like losing a piece of yourself. At its core, this isn't just about parking spaces or warehouses. It's about respect for boundaries, laws, and each other. If we can't agree on those basics, how can we expect to coexist peacefully? All right, folks, I want to hear your stories. Have you dealt with an HOA nightmare? Ever encountered a Karen who thought the world revolved around her? Drop your experiences in the comments below. I guarantee they'll make us all laugh, cry, or both. Also, vote on which story you think is the most outrageous. Mine, the Christmas light fine, or the orange roof guy. Let's crown the ultimate HOA villain. Let's dive deeper into why people act this way. Why do some individuals feel entitled to take over spaces that aren't theirs? Is it ignorance, arrogance, or just a blatant disregard for boundaries? Take Karen number 1, for example. She didn't just park her car in my warehouse, she tried to justify it by saying the HOA gave her permission. Permission! Since when does someone else's word override the fact that this is my property? It's like she thought the rules of basic human decency didn't apply to her. And then there was Karen number 2, who showed up with an attitude so toxic it could have been classified as hazardous waste. When I confronted her about parking in my space, she actually said, "Well, you're not using it right now, so what's the harm?" What's the harm? Lady, it's called respect. Maybe look it up sometime. But here's the thing. These Karendemics don't exist in a vacuum. They thrive in environments where power dynamics are skewed. Think about it, HOAs are supposed to maintain order, but they often become breeding grounds for micromanagement and control freaks. Some board members see themselves as mini dictators, enforcing rules that make no sense while ignoring the ones that actually matter. Like fining someone for having a mailbox that's half an inch too tall, but turning a blind eye when people invade private property. It's hypocrisy at its finest. And let's not forget the social implications. These kinds of behaviors reflect broader societal issue: entitlement, privilege, and the erosion of personal accountability. Now, let me share another real-life example that'll make your blood boil. There was this guy, let's call him Tool Guy, who decided my warehouse was his personal mechanic shop. He brought tools, oil cans, and even a hydraulic jack. When I confronted him, he had the audacity to say, "What's the big deal? It's not like you're running a business here." Not running a business? Buddy, this is private property. You don't just waltz in and start tearing things apart like you own the place. By the time I found him, there were oil stains all over the floor, and my once pristine space looked like a junkyard. That's when I realized this wasn't just about inconvenience, it was about principle. No one should have to put up with this level of disrespect. So, how did I handle it? First, I documented everything. Photos, videos, notes. I made sure I had proof of every single violation. Then, I sent formal letters to the HOA board, explaining the situation and demanding immediate action. Of course, their response was less than helpful. They claimed they weren't aware of the issue and suggested I work it out with the neighbors. Work it out? Are you kidding me? These aren't neighbors, they're invaders. At that point, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I contacted a towing company, posted official notices on every car, and made sure everyone knew the consequences of ignoring my warnings. The day the tow trucks arrived was nothing short of satisfying. Watching those cars get hauled away felt like justice served cold. But here's the bigger question. Why does this kind of behavior happen in the first place? Studies show that entitlement often stems from a lack of empathy. People like Karen number 1 and Tool Guy genuinely believe their needs outweigh anyone else's rights. They live in a bubble where they're the center of the universe, and everyone else is just background noise. It's not just annoying, it's dangerous. Because when you normalize this kind of behavior, you create a culture where respect becomes optional. And that's not something we can afford to tolerate. Whether it's an HOA overstepping its bounds or a neighbor abusing shared spaces, these situations highlight the importance of standing your ground. Sometimes, you have to fight for what's your seven, if it means going toe-to-toe with the Karens of the world. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about you. Have you ever dealt with someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them? Maybe it was an HOA nightmare, a nosy neighbor, or a full-blown Karen meltdown. Share your story in the comments below. I guarantee we'll all relate. And don't forget to vote on which situation you think is the most outrageous. Mine, the Christmas lights fine, or the guy who painted his roof orange. Let's crown the ultimate HOA villain together. Thanks for sticking around, and remember, respect isn't optional, it's essential. See you in the next video. Now, let's talk about the aftermath. The day those cars were towed, my warehouse finally felt like mine again. But the fallout was far from over. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with angry calls and texts from neighbors. Some accused me of being too harsh, while others claimed I had ruined community harmony. Harmony? What harmony? The only thing I ruined was their free parking party. One guy even had the nerve to say, "You didn't have to tow my car, I was going to move it eventually." Eventually? Sir, you've been parked there for 3 weeks without permission. Your definition of eventually clearly doesn't match mine. And then, there was Karen number 1 again, now playing the victim card. She stormed into my driveway and started yelling about how I was bullying everyone. Bullying? Lady, I'm protecting my property. If that makes me a bully, then so be it. But here's the twist. Not everyone reacted badly. A few neighbors actually thanked me. One guy said, "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to these freeloaders for years." Another admitted, "Honestly, I didn't realize the HOA was letting people abuse your space like that." Good for you for taking action. Those moments made it all worth it. Because while some people will always side with entitlement, there are others who recognize fairness when they see it. It reminded me that standing your ground isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about setting an example for others to follow. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. This wasn't just about a parking dispute, it was about power dynamics. When someone abuses their authority or lets others abuse it, you end up with chaos. Think about it. The HOA board could have stopped this mess before it started. They could have enforced clear rules about private property and held violators accountable. Instead, they chose to stay silent, leaving me to deal with the consequences. That's not leadership, that's negligence. And it's not unique to my situation. Across the country, countless homeowners face similar battles every day. Whether it's an HOA fining someone for harmless lawn decorations or a neighbor turning shared spaces into personal storage, these conflicts highlight a fundamental issue: the balance between collective control and individual rights. Here's another real-life story to drive the point home. Remember the California couple who got fined $5,000 for planting a vegetable garden in their front yard? Their HOA claimed it violated aesthetic guidelines because, apparently, tomatoes are ugly. Tomatoes. Meanwhile, other neighbors were allowed to keep lawns that wasted thousands of gallons of water during drought season. Does that sound fair to you? Of course not. But it's a perfect example of how arbitrary rules can create resentment and division within communities. And don't even get me started on the Florida homeowner who painted his roof orange after the HOA rejected his request for repairs. He didn't just defy them, turned his house into a literal statement. These stories might seem funny at first glance, but they reveal something deeper: a system that often prioritizes appearances over substance. So, where does that leave us? At the end of the day, it's about respect for boundaries, laws, and each other. Whether you're dealing with an HOA, a nosy neighbor, or a full-blown Karen, the key is knowing your rights and standing firm. Document everything, communicate clearly, and don't back down when you're in the right. Because trust me, if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. And sometimes, the only way to make them listen is by showing them you mean business. In my case, towing those cars wasn't just about reclaiming my space, it was about sending a message. This is my property, and I won't tolerate disrespect. All right, folks, let's hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Ever encountered a Karen who thought she owned the world? Share your craziest stories in the comments below. I guarantee we'll all relate. And don't forget to vote on which situation deserves the title of Ultimate HOA Villain. Mine, the Christmas lights fine, or the guy with the orange roof. Let's crown the winner together. Thanks for watching, and remember, respect isn't optional, it's essential. See you in the next video. Now, let's talk about the ripple effect of standing up for yourself. After towing those cars, something interesting happened. The neighbors who had been using my warehouse as their personal parking lot started treating me differently. Some avoided eye contact altogether, like I was some kind of monster. Others went out of their way to be overly friendly, as if buttering me up would erase what they'd done. One woman even brought me a plate of cookies with a note that said, "Thanks for keeping our neighborhood organized." Cookies? Really? If she wanted to thank someone, maybe she should have thanked herself for finally respecting boundaries. But hey, at least the message was clear. People noticed. And whether they liked it or not, they knew I wasn't going to back down. But here's the thing, this wasn't just about me anymore. It became a lesson for everyone involved. For years, these neighbors had taken advantage of gray areas, assuming no one would challenge them. They parked where they weren't supposed to, ignored rules when it suited them, and acted like accountability was someone else's problem. By towing those cars, I didn't just reclaim my space, I disrupted their sense of entitlement. Suddenly, they had to confront the consequences of their actions. And while some resented me for it, others quietly admitted it was long overdue. One neighbor even confided, "You're not the bad guy here. You're just the first person to actually do something about it." Let's take a moment to reflect on why this matters. Stories like mine aren't isolated incidents, they're symptoms of a larger issue. Across the country, homeowners associations have become battlegrounds for power struggles, petty grievances, and outright absurdity. Take the infamous case of the Texas homeowner who painted her door purple after the HOA rejected her request for a new color. When they fined her, she doubled down by painting the entire front of her house purple. Was it extreme? Absolutely. But it also highlighted the absurd lengths people will go to when they feel powerless against bureaucracy. Or consider the Michigan couple fined $1,000 for installing solar panels without approval. Solar panels in 2023. These stories might sound ridiculous, but they reveal a deeper truth. When systems prioritize control over common sense, people push back, and sometimes they push hard. Now, let's bring it back to the psychology behind all this. Why do some people feel entitled to bend or outright break the rules? Part of it comes down to social conditioning. We live in a world where convenience often trumps responsibility. If you can get away with something, why not do it? Add to that the anonymity of suburban living, where neighbors might recognize faces but rarely build real relationships, and you've got a recipe for disaster. People start seeing each other as obstacles rather than human beings. That's how you end up with situations like mine or worse, like the Florida man who installed a massive satellite dish on his roof after the HOA banned smaller ones. His reasoning? If they won't let me watch television, I'll make sure I can watch everything. Extreme? Sure, but also oddly admirable in its defiance. So, what's the takeaway here? First, know your rights. Whether it's understanding your HOA's bylaws or researching local property laws, knowledge is power. Second, document everything. Photos, videos, emails, whatever evidence you can gather will protect you if things escalate. And third, don't be afraid to stand your ground. Yes, it might ruffle feathers. Yes, it might make you unpopular for a while. But trust me, the alternative, letting people walk all over you's far worse. Because once you set a precedent of allowing disrespect, it becomes almost impossible to undo. In my case, towing those cars wasn't just about reclaiming my warehouse, it was about drawing a line in the sand. And once that line was drawn, there was no going back. All right, folks, I want to hear from you. Have you ever stood up to an HOA or dealt with a neighbor who thought they were above the rules? Share your craziest stories in the comments below. I guarantee we'll all relate. And don't forget to vote on which situation deserves the title of Ultimate HOA Villain. Mine, the Christmas lights fine, or the guy with the orange roof. Let's crown the winner together. Thanks for watching, and remember, respect isn't optional, it's essential. See you in the next video. Let's talk about the ripple effect of standing up for yourself. After towing those cars and confronting the HOA, something fascinating happened. The neighbors who had been using my warehouse as their personal parking lot started treating me differently. Some avoided eye contact altogether, like I was some kind of monster. Others went out of their way to be overly friendly, as if buttering me up would erase what they'd done. One woman even brought me a plate of cookies with a note that said, "Thanks for keeping our neighborhood organized." Cookies? Really? If she wanted to thank someone, maybe she should have thanked herself for finally respecting boundaries. But hey, at least the message was clear. People noticed. And whether they liked it or not, they knew I wasn't going to back down. But here's the thing, this wasn't just about me anymore. It became a lesson for everyone involved. For years, these neighbors had taken advantage of gray areas, assuming no one would challenge them. They parked where they weren't supposed to, ignored rules when it suited them, and acted like accountability was someone else's problem. By towing those cars, I didn't just reclaim my space, I disrupted their sense of entitlement. Suddenly they had to confront the consequences. Some resented me for it. Others quietly admitted it was long overdue. One neighbor even confided, "You're not the bad guy here. You're just the first person to actually do something about it." Let's take a moment to reflect on why this matters. Stories like mine aren't isolated incidents, they're symptoms of a larger issue. Across the country, homeowners associations have become battlegrounds for power struggles, petty grievances, and outright absurdity. Take the infamous case of the Texas homeowner who painted her door purple after the HOA rejected her request for a new color. When they fined her, she doubled down by painting the entire front of her house purple. Was it extreme? Absolutely. But it also highlighted the absurd lengths people will go to when they feel powerless against bureaucracy. Or consider the Michigan couple fined $1,000 for installing solar panels without approval. Solar panels. In 2023, these stories might sound ridiculous, but they reveal a deeper truth. When systems prioritize control over common sense, people push back, and sometimes they push hard. Now, let's bring it back to the psychology behind all this. Why do some people feel entitled to bend or outright break the rules? Part of it comes down to social conditioning. We live in a world where convenience often trumps responsibility. If you can get away with something, why not do it? Add to that the anonymity of suburban living, where neighbors might recognize faces but rarely build real relationships, and you've got a recipe for disaster. People start seeing each other as obstacles rather than human beings. That's how you end up with situations like mine or worse, like the Florida man who installed a massive satellite dish on his roof after the HOA banned smaller ones. His reasoning? If they won't let me watch television, I'll make sure I can watch everything. Extreme? Sure, but also oddly admirable in its defiance. So, what's the takeaway here? First, know your rights. Whether it's understanding your HOA's bylaws or researching local property laws, knowledge is power. Second, document everything. Photos, videos, emails, whatever evidence you can gather will protect you if things escalate. And third, don't be afraid to stand your ground. Yes, it might ruffle feathers. Yes, it might make you unpopular for a while. But trust me, the alternative, letting people walk all over you's far worse. Because once you set a precedent of allowing disrespect, it becomes almost impossible to undo. In my case, towing those cars wasn't just about reclaiming my warehouse, it was about drawing a line in the sand. And once that line was drawn, there was no going back. All right, folks, I want to hear from you. Have you ever stood up to an HOA or dealt with a neighbor who thought they were above the rules? Share your craziest stories in the comments below. I guarantee we'll all relate. And don't forget to vote on which situation deserves the title of Ultimate HOA Villain. Mine, the Christmas lights fine, or the guy with the orange roof. Let's crown the winner together. Thanks for watching, and remember, respect isn't optional, it's essential. See you in the next video. Let's bring this story to a close, but not without reflecting on what it all means. After towing those cars, confronting the HOA, and dealing with the fallout, I learned something important, not just about my neighbors or the system, but about myself. Standing up for what's yours isn't easy. It takes courage, patience, and a willingness to face backlash. But here's the truth. If you don't protect your boundaries, no one else will. And sometimes, being the bad guy is exactly what it takes to restore balance. The aftermath wasn't perfect, of course. Some neighbors still gave me the cold shoulder, and the HOA board tried to save face by sending out a vague email reminding everyone to respect private property. Vague. Oh, the irony. But despite their half-hearted attempt at damage control, something shifted. People started parking where they were supposed to. The warehouse was finally mine again, free from strangers' cars and oil stains. More importantly, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Knowing I'd fought for what was right and won was worth every moment of tension. But let's zoom out one last time and talk about the bigger picture. Stories like mine happen every day, in neighborhoods across the country. Whether it's an HOA fining someone for harmless lawn decorations, or a neighbor turning shared spaces into personal storage, these conflicts highlight a fundamental issue: the balance between collective control and individual rights. And while HOAs are supposed to maintain order, they often become tools for micromanagement and power struggles. When rules are enforced inconsistently or worse, ignored altogether, it creates a culture of entitlement where people feel free to do whatever they want, consequences be damned. Here's the silver lining. These situations also reveal the importance of standing your ground. Whether you're dealing with an HOA, a nosy neighbor, or a full-blown Karen, the key is knowing your rights and refusing to back down. Document everything, communicate clearly, and don't let anyone bully you into submission. Because trust me, once you set a precedent of allowing disrespect, it becomes almost impossible to undo. In my case, towing those cars wasn't just about reclaiming my warehouse, it was about drawing a line in the sand. And once that line was drawn, there was no going back. Now, let's talk about you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a neighbor who thought they were above the rules? Maybe it was a fine for something ridiculous, like holiday decorations or a mailbox color. Or maybe it was something more serious, like property disputes or noise complaints. Whatever it was, I want to hear about it. Share your craziest stories in the comments below. I guarantee we'll all relate. And don't forget to vote on which situation deserves the title of Ultimate HOA Villain. Mine, the Christmas lights fine, or the guy with the orange roof. Let's crown the winner together. Before we wrap this up, let me leave you with one final thought. Respect isn't optional, it's essential. Whether it's respecting boundaries, laws, or each other, we all have a responsibility to treat others the way we want to be treated. And when someone crosses that line, it's up to us to hold them accountable. So, the next time you find yourself in a situation like mine, remember this: stand your ground, protect what's yours, and never underestimate the power of towing a few cars to make a point. Thanks for sticking around, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep fighting for what's right, and always keep your receipts. See you soon. You leave for vacation, expecting to return to the home you've worked so hard for. But instead, you come back to a nightmare. The HOA sold your house right out from under you. No warning, no notice, just gone. But here's the thing. They had no idea who they were messing with. Because I wasn't just going to take it, I was going to take everything back. I arrived at my house after a long and well-deserved vacation. The trip had been perfect, a much-needed break from the routine of daily life. As I pulled into my driveway, something seemed off. A large moving truck was parked outside, and people were carrying furniture inside. At first, I assumed someone was moving into the house next door, but as I stepped closer, I saw them walking directly into my house. Confusion turned to concern as I rushed toward the front door. The lock was different. My keys no longer fit. My heart pounded as I knocked hard. A man answered, looking surprised to see me. He casually asked if he could help me. I told him that I was the owner of this house, and I demanded to know what was going on. His face changed from mild surprise to discomfort as he explained that he had just purchased the house from the homeowners association. Panic set in. I told him that was impossible, that this was my home, and I had never put it up for sale. He looked at me with pity and said he had the paperwork to prove it. I could not believe what I was hearing. My house had been sold while I was away. I demanded to see the documents, and he reluctantly handed them over. As I scanned the pages, my eyes landed on the name of the seller, the homeowners association. I felt sick. They had somehow foreclosed on my house and sold it without my knowledge. My hands trembled as I read through the legal jargon. According to the paperwork, my home had been seized due to unpaid fees. I had never received any notice. I had never been informed of any outstanding balance. The thought that I had lost my home over something I had not even been made aware of was incomprehensible. I asked the new owner how much he had paid. His answer made my blood boil. The house had been sold for a fraction of its value. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My home had been practically stolen and auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. I turned on my heel and drove straight to the Homeowners Association office. The receptionist barely looked up as I stormed in and demanded to speak to someone in charge. She lazily tapped a few keys on her computer before informing me that my home had been foreclosed due to unpaid fines. I asked what fines she was referring to. She pulled up my file and began listing off ridiculous violations: unapproved landscaping, a trash can left out for too long, a minor parking violation. These were the infractions that had supposedly justified taking my house. I argued that I had never received any notices. She smirked and informed me that they had sent multiple letters to my listed address. That was the notices to an address I had not lived at in years. I pointed this out, but she shrugged and said it was my responsibility to update my contact information. I clenched my fists, trying to control my anger. This was not just an oversight. This was a setup. I demanded to speak to the board members who had authorized this foreclosure. She informed me that they were unavailable and that all foreclosure decisions were final. There was nothing I could do. The smug look on her face made my blood boil. I left the office feeling a mixture of rage and despair. My home, my belongings, everything I had worked for was gone, but I was not going to let this go without a fight. I left the Homeowners Association office with my hands clenched into fists. There was no way I was going to accept this outcome. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, my mind racing with anger and disbelief. As I sat across from him, I laid out the entire situation. He listened intently, flipping through the paperwork I had obtained from the so-called new homeowner. His face hardened as he reached the section detailing the foreclosure process. He placed the papers down and exhaled sharply. This was not just unethical. This was legally questionable. He explained that homeowners associations could foreclose on properties, but they had strict requirements for notification and due process. If they had sent notices to an outdated address without making an effort to contact me properly, there was a strong case for fraud. He asked me for every piece of documentation I had ever received from the Homeowners Association, and I promised to gather it all. He immediately drafted a demand letter to the Homeowners Association, calling for an emergency halt on the sale and threatening legal action for wrongful foreclosure. The next step was to investigate whether this was an isolated incident or a pattern of abuse by the association. I started reaching out to neighbors, knocking on doors, and posting on local community forums. The responses I received confirmed my worst fears. Several homeowners had faced similar issues, with homes being sold for minor infractions and the board members profiting from the sales. Some had fought back, but had been buried in legal fees. Others had simply given up and walked away, unable to battle the legal juggernaut that the Homeowners Association had become. Fueled by this new information, my lawyer and I decided to escalate. We filed a lawsuit challenging the foreclosure, demanding that the sale be reversed on the grounds of improper notice and fraudulent practices. We also requested a temporary restraining order to prevent any further transactions involving my house. The court scheduled a hearing within 2 weeks. That gave me time to prepare, but it also gave the Homeowners Association time to retaliate. The retaliation started almost immediately. The Homeowners Association suddenly found additional violations against me, claiming I had broken more community rules. My car was suddenly flagged as being parked improperly. I received notices for infractions that made no sense, like a complaint about loud music when I was not even home. The pressure was clearly an attempt to make me back off. I documented everything, taking pictures, saving emails, and recording conversations. The legal battle was becoming more than just about my house. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had taken advantage of homeowners for years. Days before the court hearing, I received an offer from the Homeowners Association. They wanted to settle. They offered me a sum of money to walk away, to give up my claim and let the sale stand. The amount was insulting. They wanted me to disappear quietly, to take a fraction of what my house was worth and move on. I refused without hesitation. They had stolen my home, and I was not going to let them get away with it. The court date arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, my evidence, and the determination to win. The Homeowners Association had their legal team prepared, but the moment they realized the extent of our evidence, their confidence wavered. My lawyer laid out the fraudulent notices, the unfair fines, and the pattern of abuse. The judge listened carefully, then turned to the Homeowners Association's lawyer and asked for their justification. Their response was weak, filled with legal loopholes and technical jargon that did not hold up under scrutiny. The judge asked why they had not made a reasonable effort to contact me directly. Their silence spoke volumes. The judge took a deep breath and glanced at the stack of evidence in front of him. He turned to the Homeowners Association's lawyer, waiting for an explanation that never truly came. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The lawyer fumbled with his papers, searching for something to justify what had been done, but nothing could excuse the blatant disregard for due process. The judge finally spoke, his tone sharp and unforgiving. He stated that the Homeowners Association had violated fundamental legal principles, and their foreclosure process was riddled with mismanagement and fraudulent intent. The courtroom remained still as the judge began outlining the failures of the Homeowners Association. He pointed out that proper notifications had not been sent, that fines had been unreasonably exaggerated, and that the board had acted recklessly by selling a home without giving the owner a fair chance to dispute the charges. As he continued, the Homeowners Association's lawyer shrank further into his chair, realizing that their case was crumbling by the second. After nearly an hour of deliberation, the judge finally delivered his verdict. The foreclosure was deemed illegal, and the sale was reversed. The house legally remained mine, and the new owner was ordered to vacate the property immediately. Furthermore, the Homeowners Association was instructed to pay damages for the undue stress, emotional trauma, and financial burden they had caused. A deep sense of relief washed over me, but the battle was not over yet. As the ruling was finalized, murmurs spread through the courtroom. Reporters and spectators had gathered to witness what was turning into a landmark case. This was no longer about just one house. This was about exposing corruption within homeowners associations across the country. My victory meant that other homeowners who had been unfairly targeted could now challenge their own cases with renewed hope. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse and took a deep breath. The Homeowners Association had been defeated, but their tactics had done permanent damage to their reputation. They had operated in secrecy for too long, thinking they could abuse their power without consequences. That illusion had been shattered. The days following the ruling were filled with activity. News outlets covered the case, and homeowners across the country began sharing their own horror stories of fraudulent fines and illegal foreclosures. Investigations were launched, and legal reforms were proposed to prevent similar cases from happening again. Some board members of the Homeowners Association resigned in disgrace, while others faced personal lawsuits from other affected homeowners. I returned to my house, stepping inside for the first time since the nightmare had begun. It felt different, but it was mine again. As I walked through the empty rooms, I realized how close I had come to losing everything. This experience had changed me, but it had also given me a purpose. I knew that my fight was not just for myself. It was for everyone who had been manipulated, pressured, or forced out of their homes by corrupt and power-hungry associations. It was time to hold them accountable, and I was ready to make sure that no one else would go through what I had endured. The news of the court's decision spread like wildfire. Within days, my case became the symbol of homeowners fighting back against corrupt associations. Messages flooded my inbox from people across the country, each sharing their own horror stories of being harassed, fined into submission, or even having their homes stolen in the same way. It was no longer just about me. It was about exposing a system designed to exploit homeowners under the guise of community management. I knew that the Homeowners Association would not back down easily. Their power had been threatened, and their leaders were desperate to maintain control. Retaliation came swiftly. A letter arrived stating that I was banned from attending future Homeowners Association meetings. Another claimed that I still owed fines, even though the court had ruled in my favor. They wanted to drag me into another legal battle, hoping I would be too exhausted to fight back. They underestimated me. With the court's ruling in hand, my lawyer filed additional motions against the Homeowners Association. We requested a full financial audit, forcing them to disclose how they had used association funds over the years. What we uncovered was staggering. Thousands of dollars in unapproved expenditures, luxury vacations charged to the Homeowners Association account, inflated salaries for board members. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The fallout was immediate. News outlets reported on the financial scandal. Homeowners who had once feared speaking out began demanding answers. A formal petition to remove the entire board gained traction, and within weeks, it had enough signatures to force a vote. The Homeowners Association scrambled to save themselves, issuing public statements claiming they had always acted in the best interests of the community. Nobody believed them. The final meeting of the Homeowners Association was held in a packed community center. Residents who had been silent for years now had the courage to stand up. They demanded resignations. They demanded refunds for fraudulent fees. They demanded change. Under mounting pressure, the board members began resigning one by one. Some tried to shift the blame onto others, but the evidence was overwhelming. They had exploited the very people they were supposed to protect, and their time was up. With the corrupt board removed, a new committee was formed, one that prioritized transparency and fairness. Policies were rewritten to prevent future abuses. Homeowners who had lost their properties due to similar fraudulent foreclosures were able to take legal action to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The victory was bigger than just my home. It was a shift in power, a warning to every corrupt homeowners association that thought they were untouchable. I stood outside my house, watching as the last of the moving trucks drove away. The people who had once tried to take everything from me were gone, and the home that had been stolen was finally, undeniably mine. This fight had taken months of my life, but it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for every homeowner who had ever been bullied by those who were supposed to serve them. Justice had been served, but the battle was far from over. As long as these associations existed, so did the potential for corruption. This victory was a step forward, but it was also a reminder. Homeowners needed to remain vigilant, to question authority, to never allow power to go unchecked. I had won my home back, but more importantly, I had helped ensure that no one else would have to fight the same battle alone. The Homeowners Association may have been dismantled, but the scars of their corruption remained. The fight had ended for me, but the war against similar injustices was still ongoing. My victory had encouraged others to come forward, but it also painted a target on my back. Some former board members, still bitter from their downfall, attempted to undermine everything I had accomplished. They spread false rumors, claiming that I had manipulated the system to regain my home unfairly. Their words carried little weight, but their desperation was evident. Legal reforms began to take shape. Lawmakers, now aware of the widespread abuse by homeowners associations, started proposing new regulations to protect homeowners. Public pressure mounted, and hearings were held to expose the extent of the fraudulent practices. Testimonies from victims of homeowners association abuse flooded these sessions, each story more horrifying than the last. It was no longer just about my case. It was about every person who had suffered at the hands of these unchecked organizations. As investigations deepened, more disturbing details emerged. Many homeowners associations had been operated like criminal enterprises, with board members pocketing money under the guise of community maintenance fees. Some associations had deliberately mismanaged funds, using them for personal luxuries instead of neighborhood improvements. When the financial records were made public, the scale of corruption was undeniable. With growing evidence, multiple lawsuits were filed against former board members. Some were charged with embezzlement, while others faced civil suits from the homeowners they had defrauded. The cases took years to resolve, but justice was finally being served. The homeowners who had been wrongfully evicted began reclaiming their properties. Others received compensation for the damages they had suffered. The tides had turned, and the fear that once kept people silent had been replaced by a determination to hold the corrupt accountable. For me, life slowly returned to normal. My home, once a battleground, became a place of peace again. The relief of knowing that it was finally and rightfully mine allowed me to move forward. The memories of the fight remained, but they no longer consumed me. Instead, they fueled a newfound purpose. I continued advocating for homeowners' rights, using my experience to help others who were still trapped in similar battles. Despite the victories, the system was far from perfect. While some corrupt homeowners associations were dismantled, others still thrived in different parts of the country. The fight against their abuses had to continue. I had learned that power unchecked was dangerous and that silence enabled corruption to grow. The people who had tried to steal my home were gone, but their legacy of exploitation left an imprint on the community. It served as a reminder that vigilance was necessary to prevent history from repeating itself. No one should have to endure what I had gone through, and I was determined to ensure that others had the knowledge and support they needed to protect themselves. Standing on my front porch, I looked at my home, now truly mine. The battle had been long and exhausting, but I had won. And with that victory came the responsibility to ensure that no one else had to fight the same war alone. The legal battles had set a precedent, but the fight was far from over. The media continued covering the case, bringing more victims to light. Each day, new homeowners came forward with stories of fraudulent fines, fabricated violations, and illegal foreclosures. The pressure on lawmakers increased, forcing them to take a stand against corrupt homeowners associations. Legislators began drafting new laws that would restrict the power of these organizations, requiring transparency in financial dealings and stricter guidelines before a property could be seized. As these legal changes took shape, I realized how deeply rooted the corruption had been. Some homeowners associations fought back, hiring high-profile lawyers to lobby against the proposed regulations. They argued that these new laws would weaken their ability to manage communities effectively. Their arguments were nothing more than desperate attempts to retain control. The truth was, evident homeowners associations had been abusing their authority for years, and the people were no longer willing to accept it. Despite the resistance, the momentum was unstoppable. The scandal surrounding my case had caused a ripple effect, with multiple states proposing homeowner protection laws. Some associations voluntarily dissolved, unwilling to face legal scrutiny. Others were forced to restructure, with new leadership committed to fairness and transparency. The most corrupt associations found themselves under federal investigation, with their board members facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. I watched as the system began to change, knowing that my battle had played a small part in the larger movement. Homeowners who had once felt powerless now had a voice. They organized, created watchdog groups, and demanded oversight. Community members who had been afraid to speak out realized they were not alone. The homeowners association model, once a tool for exploitation, was being dismantled and rebuilt in a way that prioritized the rights of homeowners rather than the greed of a few. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My house was not just a symbol of victory, but of resilience. The people who had tried to take it from me had lost, and in doing so, they had exposed an entire network of corruption. As I walked through my neighborhood, I saw the changes firsthand. Homeowners were no longer afraid to question the decisions of their associations. Meetings were open and transparent. Board members were held accountable. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was no longer in the hands of the few who sought to exploit it. There were still battles to be fought, but the war had turned in favor of the homeowners. This was not just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming control, ensuring that no one else would be forced into the same nightmare. I stood in my doorway, looking at the home that had nearly been stolen from me, and knew that I had done the right thing. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. what had been stolen from them. With every victory, the message became clearer. The era of unchecked power within homeowners associations was over. Homeowners were no longer helpless victims of bureaucracy and hidden agendas. They had learned how to fight back, how to organize, and how to demand fairness. The strength of a community did not lie in its association board members, but in the people who lived there, the people who refused to be manipulated. The sense of closure I had been searching for finally arrived. My house was more than just a home, it was proof that justice could be served. Every brick, every room, every inch of it stood as a reminder that standing up for what is right is never in vain. I spent my time helping others prepare their cases, guiding them on how to challenge their associations, how to collect evidence, and how to fight for their rights. What had started as a personal battle had transformed into something much bigger. It had become a cause that would ensure no homeowner would have to endure the nightmare I had lived through. I watched as people who had once felt hopeless found their strength. I saw communities rebuild trust, free from the shadow of corruption. The power had shifted permanently. Homeowners associations that had ruled through fear were dismantled, and in their place stood fair and transparent governance. Walking through my neighborhood, I no longer felt the weight of uncertainty. The fight had been long, but the outcome had been worth every moment. Justice had prevailed, and with it, a future where homeowners could live without the constant fear of their own associations turning against them. The ripple effect of the legal battles continued to expand beyond my neighborhood. Homeowners in different states began questioning the authority of their associations, demanding accountability and pushing for further legislative reforms. Some associations, seeing the mounting pressure, voluntarily implemented changes to ensure compliance with the new laws. Others resisted, clinging to outdated policies and using intimidation tactics to maintain control. Their resistance only fueled the movement, as homeowners became more determined than ever to expose corrupt practices. Reports emerged detailing the extent of abuse that had been overlooked for years. Some homeowners associations had forced elderly residents out of their homes over trivial fines, while others had hidden financial records to cover up fraudulent spending. Investigations led to criminal charges against board members who had stolen from their communities. Courtrooms across the country were filled with cases of homeowners fighting back, no longer afraid to challenge the organizations that had once seemed untouchable. The change was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Government officials began working with advocacy groups to draft comprehensive homeowner protection laws. These laws mandated stricter oversight of homeowners associations, requiring detailed financial disclosures, limits on excessive fines, and independent audits. The power dynamics had shifted permanently. Homeowners who had once feared their associations now held them accountable, ensuring that no board member could exploit their position for personal gain. Despite these victories, the fight was not over. Some homeowners associations adapted, finding loopholes in the new regulations and using alternative legal tactics to enforce control. They targeted those who had been most vocal, attempting to drag them into court with frivolous lawsuits. They spread misinformation, hoping to regain lost influence by creating confusion and division within communities. However, the homeowners had learned their lesson. They remained united, pushing back against every attempt to regain control. The knowledge they had gained empowered them, ensuring that the old ways of operation would never return. I continued to offer support to those still facing battles of their own. Calls and emails poured in from homeowners seeking guidance on how to navigate legal challenges, how to organize within their communities, and how to ensure that the new protections were enforced. Each success story reinforced the impact of the movement. What had started as a personal struggle had grown into a nationwide reckoning. The day came when I no longer needed to fight. The laws had been rewritten, the most corrupt homeowners associations had been dismantled, and homeowners across the country were protected in ways they had never been before. Standing on my porch, looking at the home that had once been nearly taken from me, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in years. The battle had been long, but justice had won.